Today we're going to be talking about the Roaring Twenties, a time of social and economic growth in the United States. Following the World War I time period, the country kind of went into a period of large economic growth, and life for many improved in the country. Some people still face a lot of hardship, which is what we'll be talking about during the course of this unit. But we're going to take a look today at just a few parts of this. So if you look, the screen is showing what would be set up in your interactive notebook. You're going to set up on the next clean page this indicator. It says 5-4.1. Summarize the daily life in the post-World War I period of the 1920s, including improvements in the standard of living, transportation, and entertainment, impact of the 19th Amendment, the Great Migration, the Harlem Renaissance, and Prohibition, and racial and ethnic conflicts. So we're going to be taking a look at these things in this unit of study. We're going to focus on the first part of that today. But if you would, right now, if you'll set this up in your interactive notebook, you can hit pause in the player on your screen and it'll allow you to write it down as I go ahead and keep moving forward. So the first thing I want to look at today is thinking about technology. And you think about technology today, we think about things like iPads and iPhones and Android devices, but technology is anything that improves lives, as you remember back from other units that we've studied this year. So I'm just going to kind of read this and hit some of the highlights here. New advances change everyday lives. The standard of living rose as new technology, such as automobiles, airplanes, radios, and movies that were mass-produced on assembly lines became available. Mass production allowed goods to be produced cheaply and more efficiently. New appliances and an increased reliance on electricity to run them also changed the daily lives of many Americans, particularly women. Keeping in mind that this time period in history, there was a lot of women stayed at home full-time, and the things that came out during this time, a lot of them were geared to help improve things around the house, such as if you look at the ad in the bottom left-hand corner, it says home appliances with a lady, dated 1924. If you look closely what device it is that she's using, and I'll make that bigger. Move some things. She is using a vacuum cleaner there. So you think about a luxury item during that time period would have been a vacuum, actually. The next item over is out of a kitchen. You have an oven here with a stove over here, and then the last one over here is actually a sales advertisement. It says, Burns, you can beat the price rise if you buy today. You can save money if you buy your GE now before prices rise. Don't wait. Tomorrow may be too late. Our easy budget plan makes it easy to own one now. So it says 25 cents a day. So people are actually going to make payments on this device, and this device is a refrigerator by General Electric. Interesting thought here is that a lot of people bought these luxury items on what we call credit, so they didn't really have necessarily the money for them. They just paid on them over time. What I would make sure to write down in my notebook from this section would be the underlined parts. So set up the heading and then the part that's underlined. Fashion in the 1920s. If you take a look, there's some changes that take place. If you look at the clothing, got men and women here to think about, but more particularly women's fashion was very different during this time period from what it had been. Women prior to this were more covered with their clothes, and that a lot of your skirts went down to the floor, and long sleeves, short sleeves during warmer months, but typically long sleeves. A lot of times multiple layers of clothing. Hairstyles prior to this for women were meant to be longer. So here you see women with Shorter hairstyles. So, for example, then, wearing hats. They have what's considered a bob haircut. So basically where they're a short style haircut. These women that dress like this were known as flappers, was the common name for them. Kind of a little bit of slang from the time period. But very big change in the way women dressed and even the types of things that women did. It says, although the 1920s are often called the Roaring Twenties, it was not a good time for all Americans. Some groups, such as sharecroppers, farmers, and underpaid factory workers, were not able to enjoy the rising standard of living. They could not afford to buy the automobiles and appliances that they helped to manufacture, and only extremely wealthy Americans were able to take advantage of air travel. So, during this time period, we said there was a lot of economic growth and that the standard of living had went up, which means it gotten better. More technology, more appliances, more things to help make people's lives better. But it didn't necessarily work for everybody. Some of those same groups of people that we've talked about so far in history that have had a harder time than others, such as your sharecroppers, which really started a lot after the Civil War. Your sharecroppers and your farmers and your factory workers are still some of those people that are going to have a standard of living that's less than everybody else. So think back to when we talked about the tenements and the way people lived in the big cities. Some of these people are still not going to be able to get out of that. The people that are going to benefit during this time are your middle class and your upper class, people that make more money. Things like air travel, for example, were a luxury, meaning that not everybody could do that. Only the really wealthy people in the United States could travel by air. Once again on this slide, things that I would write down in my notebook are things that are underlined, so like the top of this page. American culture came to be more standardized as people embraced the mass culture offered by the movies and radio. Americans were able to communicate and share experiences through the use of this new technology. Now, so during this time period, if you think about it, new styles of entertainment happen and people get to participate in them, such as radio. You notice the picture over to the left shows a group of children sitting down. They are listening to the radio. Today, the way we sit around and watch TV was what happened during this time. People would sit and listen to the radio. You would have shows that came on the radio that had a storyline even to them, and people would sit and listen. There was music on the radio, but there was much more to the radio than just music. Then the picture to the right, you notice, is a movie theater. As they were called originally, moving pictures came out, and people in America really grabbed a hold of this idea of going and being able to watch a movie. The first movies were actually silent films that they would even put a piano player in the movie theater, and that person would play music that kind of matched the storyline. So if something bad was getting ready to happen in the movie, they would have a lot of suspenseful music played by the piano player to kind of go along with the pictures. And then they move into adding the audio of voices to those films so that people can enjoy them in that way. I would, even though there's not anything underlined on this slide, I would summarize or write in your own words the fact that the culture in the United States at this time promoted the entertainment such as movies and radio. Then the last thing that we're going to talk about today is actually the women's right to vote, which was the 19th Amendment. So we think about going back to something we looked at earlier. Women are dressing different, and women are starting to do more um, risky things as they were saw during the time. Women were um, doing things such as openly dancing in public, um, and they had changed their dress. They were doing things like drinking in public, which we'll talk about prohibition. So then the way that goes is they start going to these places called speakeasies that are illegally selling alcohol. And even one of the most risque things was that even women would start to kiss men in public. And that was a big deal during this time period. But one of the biggest things that happened for women during this time was the right to vote. The 19th Amendment, which was passed in 1920 after the government acknowledged the contributions of women during World War I, what was then known as the Great War, removed gender restrictions for voting, allowing women to vote. Except in the western states where they were a cherished minority, women citizens rarely had a voice in their government. This was a major step to a more democratic government for the United States because more people were represented after the passing of the 19th Amendment. So you have an advertisement over here that says women work, women vote. So what I would write down off of this page is I would make sure that I had down the 19th Amendment, and I would write in your words what it was and why it was important to women and their right to vote. So kind of summarizing some of the things that we've talked about today. The 1920s were a big time in our country for new technology. Women started to do things that they had not done before, or even things such as the right to vote. And culture started to change, like new entertainment and that type of thing. And we'll be learning about more of these things in class.